It's the late 1700s on a crisp autumn day along the Rideau Waterway, and European settlers have begun to arrive at a rate previously unseen by local indigenous groups ever before. Settlers' knowledge of this land is little to none, and they're unlikely to survive the winter before them.
Local indigenous groups help these early settlers by teaching them to make and use snowshoes and toboggans, while others are instructed on resourceful ways to preserve and produce food, even tapping the local maple trees. As the days shorten and the crisp fall air gives way to the gnawing cold of winter, families huddle in one-room cabins to keep warm. They're sustained by the produce they were instructed to grow, the dried meat they were taught to make, and the warmth of the fire that endlessly burns to keep light and life.
Once winter is past, settlers, now wiser and stronger, face the year with new determination. Larger, sturdier homes are erected, and tasks are made more systematic in order to benefit from the land as much as possible. How and why did settlers willingly subject themselves to the harsh wilderness of Upper Canada? What drove them to this place? Money? Their king? And how did this affect Indigenous life in this area?
We will explore the relationship between Indigenous groups, the Crown, and its representatives in the Rideau region, and how settler families, unprepared for the winter ahead, ever managed to survive. This story is best understood by first exploring the region and those that inhabited it long before Europeans ever thought to come to the New World. The Iroquois and Algonquin long called the Rideau region home. They knew how to best survive and excel within the region's challenging environment, and did so for millennia before settlers ever stepped foot in this region. While these skills represented a concrete knowledge, their relationship went much deeper. And despite what will be the destructive aftermath of colonization, these Indigenous groups chose to engage in meaningful ways with settlers, participating in the fur trade, taking sides in wars not of their own making, and identifying winter as being a unique challenge for early settlers, teaching them how to best tap into the natural resources they had at hand. The Crown's main concern was to hold and develop the land they had gained through the defeat of the French. In order to achieve this, they needed to establish a loyal base in this area through settlement.
This would firmly establish the economic and physical control they so desired in the region. But here's the catch. People didn't want to come to the Rideau Waterway. It was far from civilization, wild and untamed.
In fact, it took war and incentivization to convince former soldiers and Loyalists to systematically settle the Rideau. But this was not a perfect solution, as the difficulty and remoteness of the region led some Loyalists, who had been granted land, to leave their land unoccupied, hindering settlement and growth in this region for years. Facilitating settlement in Upper Canada was made possible by the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which, unbeknownst to Indigenous groups, effectively turned over their land rights to the Crown. Settlers came for numerous reasons and from various stations in life, some as Loyalist refugees fleeing the consequences of fighting on the losing side of the American Revolutionary War, others as economic migrants looking for land and a fresh start, while still others were speculators, many of whom never even stepped foot on their land, hoping to passively make a profit off of the growing demand for property in Upper Canada.
And while this simplifies a complex period of colonization in this area, one aspect of this is clear. Settlers were not all coming to Upper Canada with a common purpose or goal.
Some settlers were true agents of the Crown, directly benefiting from and participating in the Crown's ambitions, while others came passively, solely concerned with their family's survival. While some Loyalist refugee settlement had begun in Upper Canada along the St. Lawrence River in Kingston during the American Revolutionary War, it wasn't until 1790, several years after the war, that the first true wave of settlement in the Rideau region began.
Roger Stevens was the first recorded Loyalist settler to arrive along the Rideau Waterway, after having served the British forces in the American Revolutionary War. He arrived in 1790 with his wife Polly and their 3 young children to what we now know as Merrickville and the surrounding area.
While central settlements like Merrickville were necessary for the development of water-powered industry in Upper Canada, southerly settlements were strategically valuable, using loyal men experienced in war to act as a veteran force and defensive barrier along the American border. In order to understand this next phase of settlement, we must first meet General John Graves Simcoe. He was a British soldier and statesman who had fought against American rebels in the Revolutionary War and rose through the ranks to become the first lieutenant governor of Upper Canada. Throughout his time in office, he encouraged immigration and agriculture while also supporting defense and road building. The Proclamation of 1792 was issued by Simcoe in order to address the settlement of Crown land in the province of Ontario. His goal was to populate the area with Americans who were even passively loyal to the king, because he considered them perfectly suited to settle and cultivate the land, as they were hardy and well adapted to this environment.
And this was important to Britain's overall goal, to secure and expand their holdings in Upper Canada and beyond.
Settlers coming to the Rideau region were unprepared for the harsh environment and the challenges that came with it.
In the weeks and months leading up to their first winter, settlers relied heavily on the Algonquin and Iroquois for guidance and wisdom on how to best prepare for the long months ahead.
This included such things as making weather-appropriate clothing, toboggans and snowshoes, using the land's natural resources, and preserving meat for year-round portable protein.
And without their guidance, settlers would have surely perished.
Once a settler arrived, their first order of business was to create a simple house as quickly as possible in order to survive the winter. This was usually a one-room house that would eventually be converted into a stable once they had constructed a more permanent dwelling. It would have been a panicked rush before their first winter, building their house, planting a garden, and clearing land for crops and livestock.
To add to this already challenging feat, many settlers had very little farming experience, if any at all. And while a lot of this was learned, much help was given by local Indigenous groups who ensured many settlers' survival.
The Crown and its agents set about colonizing this land with great rigor, for Britain and their British king. And while settlement in Upper Canada was a success for the British, it held devastating consequences for the Indigenous groups of this area. Yet the First Nations of the Rideau were the first to help settlers survive this harsh, unforgiving wilderness. And without their guidance, early settlers never would have survived the trials of this land. Not only did they have to manage the extreme climate, but also a land that had never been worked before.
Today, the Rideau region is unrecognizable from the wilderness it once was. You may find glimpses of this past life, but this land has been changed forever.
Just as the Indigenous groups who once solely called this region home, this land will never be the same.
And while settlers struggled for their own survival and economic growth, and the Crown fought for money and country, it was only the Indigenous groups of the Rideau region who acted outside of their own best interest, helping the very people who were doing them so much harm. Unfortunately, in this case, the Crown's insatiable appetite devoured the goodwill of Indigenous peoples.
Thanks for watching! Want more in-depth content? Check out our website where you'll find more detailed blogs and information, as well as some other fun stuff. And if you want to support our pursuit of accessible history, like, subscribe, or check out our Patreon, or any combination of those options. And of course, don't forget to check out our other videos. You never know what you might find.